morning, You Can Heal family. My name's Shena. We're reading the Old Testament, and today we're starting with chapter 8 of 2nd Chronicles. Enlargement of Solomon's territory. It was now 20 years since Solomon had become king, and the great building projects of the Lord's temple and his own royal palace were completed. Solomon now turned his attention to rebuilding the towns that King Hiram had given him, and he settled Israelites in them. It was at this time, too, that Solomon fought against the city of Haman Zebul and conquered it. He rebuilt Tadmor in the desert and built towns in the region of Hamath as supply centers. He fortified the cities of Upper Beth Horon and Lower Beth Horon, rebuilding their walls and installing barred gates. He also rebuilt Baalath and other supply centers at this time and constructed cities where his chariots and horses could be kept. He built to his heart's content in Jerusalem and Lebanon and throughout the entire realm. Subjugation of the enemies of Solomon. There were still some people living in the land who were not Israelites, including Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. These were descendants of the nations that Israel had not completely destroyed. So Solomon conscripted them for his labor force, and they serve in the labor force to this day. But Solomon did not conscript any of the Israelites for forced labor. Instead, he assigned them to serve as fighting men, officers in his army, commanders of his chariots, and charioteers. King Solomon also appointed 250 of them to supervise the various projects. Religious practices of Solomon, and all this is referenced back to 1 Kings chapters 9 and 10. It looks like this chapter. So a lot of these things we've heard. Solomon moved his wife, Pharaoh's daughter, from the city of David to the new palace he had built for her. He said, "My wife must now live in King David's palace, for the ark of the Lord has been there, and it is his holy ground." Now, it's just interesting to me here in this verse 11 how Solomon's wife was Pharaoh's daughter. And I'm just reading that thinking back to Moses, going down the river. Is this the same daughter that drew Moses out of the water? That's really interesting. Then Solomon sacrificed burnt offerings to the Lord on the altar he had built in the front of the foyer of the temple. The number of sacrifices varied from day to day according to the commands Moses had given. Extra sacrifices were offered on the Sabbaths, on new moon festivals, and at the 3 annual festivals, the Passover celebration, the Festival of Harvest, and the Festival of Shelters. In assigning the priests to their duties, Solomon followed the regulation of his father David. He also assigned the Levites to lead the people in praise and to assist the priests in their daily duties. And he assigned the gatekeepers to their gates by their divisions, following the commands of David, the man of God. Solomon did not deviate in any way from David's commands concerning the priests and Levites and the treasuries. So Solomon made sure that all the work related to building the temple of the Lord was carried out from the day its foundation was laid till the day of its completion. Economic operations. Later, Solomon went to Ezion-Geber and Elath, ports in the land of Edom along the shore of the Red Sea. Hiram sent him ships commanding by his own officers and manned by experienced crews of sailors. These ships sailed to the land of Ophir with Solomon's men and brought back to Solomon almost 17 tons of gold. Let's keep going. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, the Queen of Sheba. When the Queen of Sheba heard of Solomon's reputation, she came to Jerusalem to test him with hard questions. She arrived with a large group of attendants and a great caravan of camels loaded with spices, huge quantities of gold, and precious jewels. When she met with Solomon, they talked about everything she had on her mind. Solomon answered all her questions. Nothing was too hard for him to explain to her. And I remember reading this in First Kings chapter 10, and I remember commenting saying, ladies, if any of you, have done your healing work and are ready to get back into a relationship, when you're out to dinner, ask questions. And if that man starts dodging the question, let that be a red flag, right? So Queen Sheba was asking questions, and Solomon had no problem answering. He said nothing was too hard for him. So continuing on in verse 3, it says, when the Queen of Sheba realized how wise Solomon was, and when she saw the palace he had built, she was breathless. She was also amazed at the food on his table, the organization of his officials, and their splendid clothing, the cupbearers and their robes, and the burnt offerings Solomon made at the temple of the Lord. She exclaimed to the king, everything I heard in my country about your achievements and wisdom is true. I didn't believe it until I arrived here and saw it with my own eyes. Truly, I had not heard the half of it. Your wisdom is far greater than what I was told. How happy these people must be. What a privilege for your officials to stand here day after day listening to your wisdom. The Lord your God is great indeed. He delights in you and has placed you on the throne to rule for him. Because God loves Israel so much and desires this kingdom to last forever, he has made you king so you can rule with justice and righteousness. Then she gave the king a gift of 9,000 pounds of gold and great quantities of spices and precious jewels. Never before had there been spices as fine as those the Queen of Sheba gave to Solomon. Verse 10, when the crews of Hiram and Solomon brought gold from Ophir, they also brought rich cargoes of almug wood and precious jewels. The king used the almug wood to make steps for the temple of the Lord and the royal palace, and to construct harps and lyres for the musicians. Never before had there been such beautiful instruments in Judah. King Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba whatever she asked for, gifts of greater value than the gifts she had given him. Then she and all her attendants left and returned to their own land. Solomon's wealth, verse 13. Each year, Solomon received about 25 tons of gold. This did not include the additional revenue he received from merchants and traders. All the kings of Arabia and the governors of the land also brought gold and silver to Solomon. And remember back when Solomon asked the Lord said, Solomon, I'll give you whatever. And Solomon asked for riches. And the Lord said, because of that, you're going to be wealthy. And look at this. We're reading about just all this gold and wealth he has. King Solomon made 200 large shields of hammered gold, each containing over 15 pounds of gold. He also made 300 smaller shields of hammered gold, each containing about 7.5 pounds of gold. The king placed these shields in the palace of the forest of Lebanon. Then the king made a huge ivory throne and overlaid it with pure gold. The throne had 6 steps, and there was a footstool of gold attached to it. On both sides of the seat were armrests with the figure of a lion standing on each side of the throne. Solomon made 12 other lion figures, one standing on each end of each of the 6 steps. No other throne in all the world could compare to it. All of King Solomon's drinking cups were solid gold, as were all the utensils in the palace of the forest of Lebanon. They were not made of silver, because silver was considered of little value in Solomon's day. The king had a fleet of trading ships manned by the sailors sent by Hiram. Once every 3 years, the ships returned, loaded down with gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. So King Solomon became richer and wiser than any other king in all the earth. Kings from every nation came to visit him and to hear the wisdom God had given him. You see? That's why we need to be in our prayers, we need to ask for those foundational things, right? Wisdom, knowledge, understanding, stuff like that. Verse 24, year after year, everyone who came to visit brought him gifts of silver and gold, clothing, weapons, spices, horses, and mules. Solomon had 4,000 stalls for his chariot horses and 12,000 horses. He stationed many of them in the chariot cities and some near him in Jerusalem. He ruled over all the kings from the Euphrates River to the land of the Philistines and the border of Egypt. The king made silver as plentiful in Jerusalem as stones, and valuable cedar wood was as common as the sycamore wood that grows in the foothills of Judah. Solomon's horses were imported from Egypt and many other countries. Oh, wow. People came from all over to see King Solomon. And just think about it. If you're saved and knowing you're going to heaven, you're going to meet Solomon. We can ask him anything we want when we get there. And it's pretty cool, right? So now the last part of this chapter is the death of Solomon, which is in 1 Kings 11, verses 41 through 43. And it tells us again here, the rest of the events of Solomon's reign from beginning to end are recorded in the record of Nathan the prophet, and in the prophecy of Ahijah from Shiloh, and also in the visions of Iddo the seer, concerning Jeroboam son of Nebat. Solomon ruled in Jerusalem over all Israel for 40 years. When he died, he was buried in the city of his father David. Then his son Rehoboam became the next king. And that's the end of chapter 9. And again, what I kept hearing is, remembering when the Lord asked Solomon for anything he wanted, he said wisdom. So that's good for us to know. It's okay to ask for things in prayer, tangible things, but let's get wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. And then when things do come into our lives, we know how to handle them and deal with them properly, right? Amen? Okay, so that's it. Thanks for listening. If you haven't subscribed yet, go on and do it now. There's nothing like now. And hit the notification so you can join me every morning. And also, if you need any coaching, go ahead and sign up for some one-on-one time together. If you just need someone to listen to you and hear you out. A lot of times, those of us who are hurting and healing from toxic and, these horrible relationships, we're not getting heard in those relationships, and we don't matter. And I'm here to tell you you do. So go ahead and schedule a call with me. I know you'll get a lot out of that, and I look forward to working with you. Always remember, true healing begins with self-love. Why? Because God is love, and He lives on the inside of you. Bye for now.